Hey moms, it's Sheila Lynn once again, and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be sharing with you something that I wish I did during my first pregnancy, and that is to make sure I am able to communicate with my OB better. Currently, I am pregnant with my second baby, and I am more knowledgeable now because of how my first pregnancy was, especially because I ended up having an emergency C-section. So this time around, I am making sure to talk to my OB more, ask her questions, and ask for more guidance. And so here are 10 things we should ask or tell our care provider during our prenatal visits before giving birth. First is something that usually happens anyway during the first prenatal visit. Talk to your doctor about your previous pregnancy and childbirth experience. So in my case, I told her about how overweight I was, how long I was in labor, how I ended up getting an emergency C-section, and how heavy my baby was upon birth. We also talked about my past medical history, like if I was diagnosed with any condition or if I had any surgeries, and with that, it would be best to inform your doctor if you are taking any medications like maintenance meds so she can verify if that will be safe to continue during your pregnancy. Next is something I never touched on during my previous pregnancy, which I should have: my weight. This time around, I informed my OB my pre-pregnancy weight, and I asked her if my current weight during that first prenatal visit was okay and if I was gaining too much. This isn't only for moms like me who tend to gain so much weight during pregnancy. This question can also be for underweight moms who might be undernourished, which isn't good for the growing baby as well. So in those cases, your OB might recommend a better diet, an increase in healthy caloric intake, or probably more vitamins for you to have a healthier pregnancy. So after asking about my pregnancy weight, naturally I asked my OB what I should eat and what I should not eat. You see, my previous OB asked me to take prenatal milk, like those types of maternity milk they say that is good for pregnant women. But this time around, my OB told me to avoid it. In fact, there is no need to increase my milk and dairy intake in general. I mean, I can have that, but she even asked me to take non-fat milk if I really want to have some milk. She also asked me to limit my sugar and carb intake, and I completely just trusted her on this because she was constantly monitoring my blood works anyway. So I was sure she knew what she was saying. I was sure she wasn't undernourishing me and my baby. Asking about food recommendations and food restrictions was also very helpful because she was able to reassure me that I am allowed to take coffee. She was also able to tell me about my food preferences, if it's good or bad, which snacks were best to have based on the pattern of my weight gain and my blood sugar levels, those kinds of things. Still, about the weight, it would be best to make sure we ask our OB if she recommends us to do any prenatal workout or not at all. I know some moms who were asked to be on bed rest the entire pregnancy. Some were on bed rest for just like 2 weeks during the first trimester, and some were allowed to work out the entire pregnancy, even lift weights and do CrossFit, Pilates, ballet, something like that during pregnancy. So it really depends on your condition. Every pregnancy is different, and Google cannot be the judge of that. Ask your healthcare provider. In my case, she was the one who instructed me to start prenatal yoga, Pilates, or some cardio like dancing, walking, swimming, or even HIIT exercises. To be honest, I wasn't comfortable doing any prenatal workout, even yoga, during the first trimester, but she told me to start when I was, I guess, 11 weeks pregnant. So I tried, and I'm very grateful she told me to do it. During my first pregnancy, I did not talk about this enough with my OB back then. I mean, I asked once, but she gave me a vague response saying something like, yeah, you can, but that won't be necessary for the baby. So I really did not work out at all, and in the end I super duper regret it a lot. Aside from working out, you can also ask about other activities, like if you're allowed to travel, to dye your hair, to get a Brazilian wax, anything you think you would like to do while you're pregnant, because your healthcare provider will be the best person to tell you what's safe and what is not. Another simple question that you might already know the answer to is your expected date of delivery, especially if you are a more experienced mom, or if you spend so much time on the internet, or like you're using pregnancy apps. You probably already know the answer to this without asking your OB. But I also find it important to discuss with your OB, because especially if you don't have a regular period, or if you don't accurately remember the date of your last menstrual period, your EDD might depend on the transvaginal sonogram results. Also, it would be nice to talk to your OB regarding what she thinks about your due date and when she thinks you will be ready to pop. Some moms aren't recommended to carry their baby for more than 40 weeks. Some are allowed to give birth up to a week later. Some also need to give birth as early as 37 weeks based on, let's say, their history or their condition, or if they are carrying multiples. So along with asking about your EDD, you can ask about your last several weeks in general, so you will know what you can expect, and you can plan ahead in terms of scheduling a maternity leave, packing your hospital bag, arranging your finances, and etc. You can also ask how long she thinks you will be staying in the hospital, so that you can let your family know ahead. Like in my case, I will be leaving our 3-year-old with my in-laws when I give birth, which means my mother-in-law will not be able to go to work when that day comes. So it will be helpful to give them heads up about how long we might stay in the hospital, which depends on whether I will give birth normally without complications, or C-section, which might need a longer recovery period. Speaking of due date, my gosh, this is one of the biggest things for both my pregnancy that gives me anxiety. Knowing what signs and symptoms should be alarming or not, which means knowing when I should rush to the hospital. Not only for first-time moms, but even when you're pregnant while you have a toddler or other children like me right now. It's not easy to just suddenly leave the house, because who's gonna look after your other kids, right? And also, now that we are still dealing with the pandemic, it's not good to just randomly go to the hospital and be sent home, because the goal is, of course, not to be exposed to the virus at all. So it would be best to just go there one time, which is when true labor is already starting, or if there is an emergency. Every OB might also have different protocols with regards to when they want you to go to the hospital. So it's better to ask in advance. Don't even wait for your 3rd trimester before you ask, because emergencies might happen anytime. So it's better to be mentally prepared and alert about these things. So still about alarming signs and symptoms and emergencies, make sure that you ask your OB what you should do. For example, now that I am in my 3rd trimester, I keep experiencing false labor or Braxton Hicks contractions, and there have been so many times I feel like just rushing to the hospital because of like how much it feels like preterm labor. Good thing I was already told and taught way ahead to only go if the contractions become too frequent, if it becomes stronger, and if it starts becoming painful like menstrual cramps or more than that, and if my water breaks, like if I suddenly have a lot of super watery discharge. So for several instances already, this was what they told me to do. So here at home, I would sit and I would just feel the contractions for 1 whole hour. Even as early as when I was still 28 weeks pregnant, 32 weeks pregnant, I've tried sitting and just monitoring my contractions to make sure it's just Braxton Hicks. No matter how much urge I had to just go to the hospital, I am very glad I have been well educated by my healthcare providers. They taught me how to time my Braxton Hicks contractions and how to find out if it was time to go or not. It would have been also very embarrassing to keep showing up in the hospital for Braxton Hicks. And look at me at 38 weeks today, still at home with no signs of true labor at all yet. So ask your doctor what to do when you feel like you're experiencing an emergency. Another thing you can inform your OB or discuss and ask questions about is your birth plan. This has been a thing for a while now, but I did not know about this. Some moms prepare an actual printout and hand it to their doctor. Some can also just do it verbally. In my case, well, during the first pregnancy, I did not think about this at all, but I wish I did. So this time around, I decided to talk to my OB about it. Number one, the plan was really the decision to do a TOLAC and attempt a VBAC. I am very glad we are on the same page on this. In fact, she was the one who kept bringing it up. We also talked about getting an epidural, breastfeeding my baby immediately after delivery, rooming in immediately, and other possibilities I was thinking of, like having my husband around during the delivery or not, things like that. The second to the last thing on my list that I made sure I really asked my OB was if she had any preferred or recommended pediatricians to receive my baby right after delivery. The reason is because I did not prepare for this during my first pregnancy. So the pedia who took care of my firstborn was just the doctor who happened to be around at that time. I honestly don't have a personal issue about that specific pediatrician, but it just ended up not being the best scenario for us. It's a long story, but to cut it short, we had to look for another pediatrician when my baby was around 2 weeks old, and by that time he was already very underweight, and he had lost so much weight, which we had no idea was happening while he was under the care of the pedia who received him immediately after birth. So we wish we chose a pedia beforehand. Like, I wish we were more prepared in that area. In fact, this time around, my OB told me it would be best to talk to the pedia head even while I'm still weeks away from my due date, so that we can talk about preferences and the immediate newborn care instructions and things that I should prepare. And last on my list is a very important thing for families like mine. It would be nice to ask ahead how much your OB charges and if she can give you a rough estimate of the total hospital bill, so you know how much you should prepare financially. During my first pregnancy, we were completely clueless that I would get an emergency C-section. So we only prepared a small amount of money, but yeah, that happened. So we ended up needing to pay more than 3 times the amount we had prepared. So this time around, since we are with a new OB and I'm planning to give birth in a different hospital, I am making sure I know how much the cost might be so we can prepare for that. I also know some people informing their OB how much their budget is so that they can be given recommendations such as options for a maternity package or giving birth in a different but still a very reliable and safe facility. It's better to know these things sooner than later, like ask ahead as early as your first trimester so you can have 8 or 7 more months to prepare, to save up, or decide depending on your family's budget. Alright, you have reached the end of this video. I wish this was helpful. If you have any thoughts, questions, or anything to add to my list, please comment below. I'm sure it will be helpful to other moms reading the comments and even to myself when I get pregnant again. I enjoyed making this video. I hope you learned something, and thank you very much for watching.